Well, this is Cabin Conversations, a regular podcast here at Woodlands Church. We're back. Which is exciting. So I'm Dave Bonison here with co-host Whitney Swenson. Hey,
Hi,
Whitney.
Dave.
Welcome back.
Hi. Thanks.
So, yeah, it's the fall.
It's good to be back.
Well, not the fall. It's not the fall. John, you tried. Hey, John.
Hey,
John's
John.
our guest for the next 6 weeks, which is super exciting.
Super excited.
Are you excited about this?
I am actually
Or
really
is it-
looking forward to it.
Okay.
Good.
I like this and I like you people.
Okay.
You're good
That's
people.
good.
This is going to be a good time.
Yeah,
I think
it
this
is.
is going to be really fun especially as we kind of extend just processing the why we do what we do, the step in thing. This is going to be a lot of fun to chit chat about, and hopefully a lot of fun for our listeners and viewers to
both.
participate in. And so, just off from the outset, viewers or listeners, if you have questions. We're specifically talking about Woodlands Church for the next 6 weeks. And so if you have questions, email them into podcasts@woodlandschurch.org. That's pretty simple, podcasts at woodlandschurch.org. Or you can send them to any of the three of us and we can talk about it. First name at woodlandschurch.org. Or you could text it to 888-225-7675.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, so that works.
It does work.
That works great. It
does.
works great.
it
So
does work.
yeah, it works.
It does.
Works for the questions.
For sure.
So, yep. It didn't work as well on Sunday.
You know, we want to be a place that tries new things, though. You know, we want to be a place that experiments, and you know, it was a reasonable risk. And I said from the outset, I mean, if you
This
were
was a
there,
risk.
I said we are taking a risk that might be an epic fail, and I think it wasn't an epic fail, just a moderate, not success.
There were some good learnings. I think there were some good learnings from the technological side.
For sure.
Once again, though, just major props to the tech team. Even just the process of getting that live digital poll up on the screen with the picture-in-picture video and how that worked online and all that stuff. It looked good.
Yeah, I
So-
think we sometimes minimize the tech magic that happens that we take for granted that there are people behind the scenes making those things look good.
Yeah.
Or just making them happen.
What were the learnings? I'm interested because I was home in bed, not feeling well, watching it, which was a bummer. This is one of those big
Yeah,
Sundays you want
I
to be a
know.
part of the life
I'm
of
sorry.
what's going on. But so I got to experience first service and then slept through second service.
I think we learned that it takes a little bit of time from the time you text a keyword until the time that you can actually
Respond.
put in an answer.
Okay.
And if you put in an answer before that response comes to you,
Oh, it
it
doesn't
actually
work.
slows down the system even more and doesn't work.
Sure.
So
And-
our inbox is filled
Right.
with 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s from different people
That weren't actual
that weren't
response.
recorded in the polls
Sure.
For sure.
because they hadn't gotten the prompt text in first.
Right.
Got it. So they were assuming as you walked through
Right.
the different, this was number one, this was number two, number three. Because you could have, I'm sitting there, is it one up top left? Probably, but which one is two? Is it to the right or to the bottom?
They were numbered on the responses.
Yeah, they were.
even. Yeah.
On the screen?
Yeah, so you could just see it and think that you're voting.
Got it.
So-
Got it.
And then there
Okay.
were a lot of people that just voted with what they said. So we have a lot of text messages that say like more than 5 years. Or,
Yeah.
That was not one of the options.
yeah, so it was pretty amusing.
Yeah.
And,
Got it.
And to be fair to technology, this is something we tested in you know, when we did it with 1 or 2, 3, 4 people,
It worked.
a certain way. But when you add 5, 6, 700 people, it just worked a little bit different. So we learned some things. But again, how do you learn things unless you do things?
Yep. So
This feels very reminiscent to when I would begin a classroom, like the start of a school year, and,
Right.
you give instructions on whatever it is. Like sometimes that was one of the first things you did, is just give instructions and see who could follow your clear instructions.
Yep.
Who jumped the gun and did something like, I know what she's going to say next, so I'm going to do it, or like skip steps 1 through 3 and just went to 5. It's just interesting. It's
Were
fun.
you
fun
one of
learnings.
those teachers that did the 20 question test and the last question
No.
was put your name at the top and then turn it in and you get 100?
Skip.
Were you one of them?
Or like the first.
I remember that
in
test.
The, in the instructions is you can skip all of this. Just go to question 20.
Right,
And if
yeah.
you didn't read the instructions, you wouldn't see that.
Yes.
I didn't do that. No.
No.
Mine was more of I would have them write out the instructions on how to make a PB&J, and I would have the supplies there, and I would be Amelia Bedelia and do literally what they wrote down. And so John,
Awesome.
here's your sandwich based on what you told me to do.
Awesome.
So
but yeah, we were talking about Sunday. we're going to pivot to the sermon.
Sure.
But we do have Dave's tidbit. I want to do.
Oh, yes. You wanted a Dave's tidbit.
Cool. This is a segment where I share something that I think is interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah, we need a little song. Dave's tidbit. So
I think you two should record it.
So there we go. I think we got it.
Yeah.
We'll have
Probably
Devin
need
just
somebody to play the recorder underneath that. That'd be great.
just a slide penny whistle.
Yep. Something.
Fantastic. So an interesting fact. Have you ever heard? Maybe either of you have of the what's called the birthday paradox.
Nope.
Oh.
So it seeks to answer the question: how many people do you need to put into a room before it's statistically likely that two of them share a birthday?
Huh.
So that's these Dave tidbits will often involve me asking you a question.
Okay.
72.
72 is your guess?
I'm going to go with 48.
48? It's 23.
Wow.
23 people. Once you have more than 23 people, it is statistically likely, over 50% likely. And it has something to do, I was reading a while ago about why, because that doesn't make any sense.
No, I would like to see the math behind that.
yeah.
The statistical formula.
I can give you. So I think that many of these things will be mathematical, and so they'll interest you in particular, Whitney, in your math background. But it has something to do with the possibilities of the pairs. There's so many different pair possibilities, and the more pairs, the more time. When you have 23 people, that person has one person has 23 pair opportunities. And so there's just so many pair opportunities for the birthdays.
Interesting.
But I would like you to look at the math too.
I would like to see it.
But I've seen it from multiple different entities that have said that is the
23
answer.
people.
23.
Yeah.
It's so small.
I mean, I don't want to brag. I did take statistics 30 years ago.
Okay, so you got the math.
30 years ago.
It's clicking in your head.
No, it doesn't feel right. I feel like there's. I would say show me the equations, but like I said, 30 years ago, I have no idea what that would look like. Yeah, they would probably have signs and symbols I wouldn't recognize on those equations. Yeah, Whitney could definitely do it.
This was definitely.
I would have to look some stuff up still.
think so?
It's been long enough.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
Here, I have the information here. I'm not going to read it all because
Thank you.
when I did, it was like, I don't really get it. But
just pass it on to us, please.
There was a logic to it. So I will share it.
I'll read it.
That's great.
And that was
Dave's
tidbit. There you go. Cool. Well, let's go back to the sermon. We went there so hard, so fast, which was great. But talking about what we do. John, out of those 6 pairs, what was your favorite?
Ooh. Oh,
Do you need
wow.
to look?
No,
You
I
got
remember
them?
preaching them.
You preached them? They're in your mind?
You know, it was interesting. I had some people who kind of came up and helped me make them better. So like they would say, oh, you could do this, or you could have said this or that. And it was awesome, actually. And I think that was one of the realities when I was kind of preparing this one is I think normally when I prepare a sermon, there's like maybe 8 pages of notes or things that I've written that I bring up there. There were probably 4 pages that probably could have been a 2-hour sermon. I mean, it was just one of those things where each one I would have loved to continue to flesh out, and really each one could have been its own sermon in a way. I really like the picture of the church not being a courthouse but a hospital, because I think that for many people who have experienced church in our current day, it's easy to look at the church as a place where you could be judged for how you look, how you come in, maybe your kids, or all sorts of different reasons why people feel nervous about coming to church, church hurt, past experiences. There's so many perceptions that may or may not be true. Even if you didn't grow up in the church, there's a narrative I think about the church being a place where of judgment, and that's wildly not what the church should look like or be like. It's not a place where you should be judged or that you have latitude to judge others, but it's a place where we ought to find healing and peace, and also find out and learn who the great healer is. And so thinking about a courthouse where there's a judge whose job is to judge you. I mean, it works for a courthouse, but not for a church.
Yeah.
And there's some sort of punitive nature in a courthouse, but in a church, like it feels more like a hospital, a place where one can find healing, and also a place where people go that are broken. People that go to a courthouse. Let's assume you're in court for a reason. There's something broken. There's something not right, big or small. But then the same is true when you go to a hospital. Generally, there's something broken, not right, big or small. The goal is different, though. The goal is healing. And Jesus just models this so incredibly well. And that's why I chose that particular story is the Pharisees and the Sadducees' tendency was to judge and punish. Jesus' tendency, which was really controversial, like he took some flack for not being judgmental throughout multiple times in Scripture. Yeah. And so here he makes it very clear that here you have this woman who's clearly broken. There's something wrong. She is caught in adultery. The Bible doesn't actually seem to conflict that. But his approach is not to judge or to be punitive the way the Pharisees wanted to be punitive, which would be to stone this woman. But it was to present grace and that no one is there to condemn her. So there's not like a doctor in a hospital. There's not they share that there's something wrong with you. You need help, and this is how we can help. This is where you find healing. I was also thinking about when someone comes to a church, sometimes they might be concerned about people learning about their background or their, who they were or what they've done. And that's also true in a courthouse where you don't want all that information. But in a hospital, you actually share that information. Here's my medical history because your expectation is healing. And so to come into a church, hiding yourself from the rest of the church is no good. It doesn't really promote healing because you don't get a chance. You might have a
gaping wound that's covered up by a bandage and nobody knows it's
right.
there.
And so if you've gone through trauma but you're hiding it because you see the church as a courthouse instead of a hospital, you treat it that way. Yeah. But in a hospital, you share what's happened in the past so that you find that healing there.
That's such a helpful distinction, I think, because even as you were saying that, I was like, yeah, but in a hospital, they're asking like, okay, do you have a history of, heart condition in your family? And that's not a shame-producing question. But then I was like, no, they ask a ton of what could be shame-producing questions though too. Like, what's your alcohol consumption like?
Right.
Or,
what's your lifestyle?
Sexual
what are you eating? What are you
all that stuff. And they need that information in order to help because everything affects everything. And what a good distinction that is in the church too about how we should be acting. How do we foster that though? How do we foster that culture so that it's not so that when people step in, they understand that distinction? I mean, speaking about it on Sunday is the first step. I think.
I would say, one of our priorities is being grace-filled, and I think it starts there. And when we practice grace-filled, and another one of my points was we're not a study group, but we're a team. And when we come together, how we practice together really does affect how we act outside these walls and as we treat. We practice like one of the places I think
practice makes permanent.
Exactly, and one of the places we practice actually starts in home. Like if you're a person who's grace-filled with your spouse and with your children and with your neighbors, you practice this. And so if you practice being grace-filled, then you start to find yourself being grace-filled. And when people share something and you don't come across with judgment because you understand the grace that you've experienced and you extend that grace to other people, it starts to create a culture where it's okay to not be okay. I think one of the ways is we even talk about redemptive stories. One of the things about being new to Woodlands is I've had a chance to get to know different people, and I've heard some incredible stories of redemption, of marriages that were in severe disrepair with adultery and other types of sin inside the marriage. And you're like, how does this couple that's sitting in front of me that is loving one another and still married, how did they do that? Yeah. And I got to hear these stories of redemption, and they're telling that story, and they told it to me, and I'm thinking, that's the power of the gospel. That's the power of grace. That's the power of a healing relationship with Jesus Christ, because he has healed their marriage because they've both submitted to being grace-filled with one another. And I think the more and more we practice it, it starts to come out in the way we live. I don't know how to change people's perspective before you come. You know?
Right. What they're carrying in necessarily.
But we can hopefully present a different picture when they do.
Which just continues to speak of the need of presence. Like you can't just dip your toes in. You gotta continually come.
I think too, one of the questions Sunday was, why'd you come here? Somebody invited you. So there's a missional piece that people are living out there. The gospel lays us all bare, right? Like, and you don't understand that until you've heard the gospel and grasped, like, I am sinful. I am in need of a savior.
Right.
So to hide whatever is you're bringing in, like you're back to your hospital analogy, to hide from the doctor what needs to be healed is, don't go to the doctor then, because you're not going to be healed. So to understand the gospel and how it lays us all bare at the foot of the cross is just that. Okay, so you experience that. You experience the grace poured out on you. You then, there's so many different avenues my mind's going right now, but you experience the grace poured out on you. You live grace-filled then here, but also we have a bunch of people that don't live here 24/7. We have a bunch of people that are going out into community and living missionally, living transformed lives, letting Jesus transform their hearts and minds in the way that they are interacting with themselves and with others. And so that there's an initial, like, how do we foster that? It's living in the gospel, regularly living in the gospel.
Yep.
Moment by moment. What does it look like for me to be a grace-filled person when I wake my kid up in the morning and when breakfast is going slower than it needs to be and she needs to kick it into gear or now we're 10 minutes late and okay, what does it look like to live in the gospel now? All those moments of your life, that leads then to what does it look like in the workplace too? We work here. We're surrounded by people that are coming to Woodlands, but there's a whole host of people that are Woodlanders that are living on mission day by day when they're out at work or getting groceries or raising their kids. There's a really good place to start on how to change that mentality.
Yeah, that the strange lifestyle that we're called to live, living differently, but also just continually living Christ-centered, living that out is so profound, so important.
Yeah.
I think too, to go back to, like, Jesus met people where they were at. He didn't he met the woman on the ground. Right. He met the woman on the way to Jairus' house, like in the crowd, right? He met Jairus in his house when he was called there. He met people where they were at, not saying like
Zacchaeus in a tree.
Zacchaeus in a tree.
That's where he happened to be at that moment.
Right. Like Jesus invites us to follow him, but he also pursued people. But he wasn't coercive about that invitation. He met them where they were at, laid out the gospel, laid it out, follow me. I think sometimes it's like, I got to fix myself up before I go to church, or I got to fix myself up before I go to the doctor.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
What? Neither of those are, you're going to the doctor for a reason. You're going to church for the same thing.
I try to look really sick when I go to the doctor.
Here's an interesting processing point, because you mentioned something there, and I pulled up the poll from Sunday from first service, because it's about how did you hear about Woodlands? Like, how did you start coming? 82% of the respondents, there are 116 responses for this one, of people who actually managed to vote in the poll. There are lots of ones and fours, but 82% said a friend invited me, which is kind of to be expected. We see that matching the statistical probability of friends saying yes to church too, that we've heard time and time again, that the vast majority of people are highly likely to come to church if you invite them. But it's then thinking too, like, if a friend brings you, you automatically do have community. There's connection there. And maybe sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to create new community when there's a way, I'm just processing church stuff right here, like there's a way that we should lean into already existent community to bring it more under the fold of Christ-centeredness. Because how often are people gathering just without thinking about how to maybe make that time or space redemptive in a way that needs to be, or could be more life-giving.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's probably more community and connection than we track. We try to track everything.
Yeah,
just
like, are you in a group? Are you in a class? Are you, on a team? That kind of thing.
Just so we can try to faithfully steward the people that God has brought to the church. But man, there's so much more going on that we don't know about.
So while I talk, maybe you can look up the second service. We asked that same question. So that question did get another response with similar data. So if you can't find it, but
I can. Yeah.
When I believe that's true, the in-person ask, and we say it's so important. But what I also see there is a positive statistic as to what you just said. That how are we acting? How are we presenting Christ outside of our walls? So, for example. So there's a high amount of people that were there on that Sunday who were invited by another person. So if I have people in my life, and one of them's Dave and one of them's Whitney, and Whitney is this pleasant, nice person that helps me weed my garden, and Dave's over here kind of the grumpy neighbor that doesn't really, is like, kids, get off my lawn, that kind of a thing.
You've played that in a video.
So raking my leaf pile.
And Dave invites me to come to church, and I'd be like, I don't think I want to go to church with Dave. But Whitney, because she's been a light into the world, she's let her good deeds give glory to God, invites me like, you know what, that's a community I could be a part of. To me, that's a really positive statistic that says that we are doing what we want to live to do, which is live out our faith and outside of these walls, and to let our light shine before men. Did you find that other?
Yeah, the question you asked second service was what's the biggest challenge in getting connected at Woodlands?
That was
the second question. The first question you asked was how long have you been at Woodlands?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. And so this was a great one.
I know.
So because it was more focused, we had about twice as many responses second service. So there's 327 responses to this poll second service. And 58% of the respondents said time was the biggest challenge. 16% said they didn't know where to start. And that's going to be great because that's 53 people that are going to have a really clear path to getting started.
For sure.
We'll talk about that next week. 58 respondents said they were nervous, which I think is a reality. And then 26 said not a priority. And John, you just took a swing with that second service. It was like, I was like, because you're just like, really, time and not a priority are the same thing, aren't they?
Yeah.
If you say you don't have time, it's just you're not making a priority of it. And I was like, that's right. But whoa, we said it out loud.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to be overly heavy with it. But I do. Yeah, we know that it's true.
We know it, and they know it's true. Everybody knows it's true, right? So we called it out. It was
I'm going to add
awesome.
a caveat to that, though, because I think we define, like I think you were starting down one path that is a conundrum for me in group life. People have community. They have community already. Most people do. Like you have somebody that you're interacting with, and I try to navigate opening spaces for people to step into Christ-centered community. That is pretty. It's not. I don't want to say rigid, but I have guideposts. There's pillars that we try to build groups on,
which we got to talk about on Sunday, which was amazing hearing about that.
So, that's what we're. That's what I'm trying to foster and develop. But the other reality is people have community. Like I don't think you're in a life group yet, John, and that's okay, right? Yep. But you're developing community already.
Yep.
So I think there's also this sense of people have a certain definition. If I'm not in a life group, I don't have community. That's not true either.
Yeah.
I think you can look at the spaces that you do have community in and drive towards redemptive purposes in those communities.
Yep.
You can be the ambassador, or you can surround yourself with Christ followers and gear towards that way too. And it can be community that's not on my list of people.
Yeah, and I think like when we get to step into community, I think we're probably gonna have to get deeper into this. But I think it's also intentional community, and because I think we can say people have community, and you can call your community all sorts of different things.
Sure.
But when we talk about community at Woodlands, we're talking about intentional community that is. What is it about that community that draws you closer to Jesus? What is it about that community helps you faithfully follow Jesus? And so if it doesn't fit that, we would say that's not what we're actually talking about. Sure. But it's like that intentional community. What I hear you describing sometimes, or here is sometimes we just, like I think Larry Osborne uses this illustration, but that we have connectors and they're all just filled up. And so we've filled them up in other ways. And it's I don't want another community. I don't want another group of people, and we don't actually want to meet anybody else that fills up that community. And so we become a little bit more introspective.
So there's probably like 4 different. The phrase we've used before has been transformational relationships, transformational community. It happens in life groups sometimes. It happens in, not always, and it happens in other relationship. So there's probably like 4 different categories of people. There's the people who have transformational relationships through Woodlands. There's people who have transformational relationships, but they're not through Woodlands per se, or they're not known. There's people who have relationships, but they're not transformational. So they have those connectors filled, but none of them are actually helping them faithfully follow Jesus. And there's people who just don't have that at all. They have empty connectors and they're feeling lonely. I think one of the interesting questions to ask is how do we help people who are in that third category, who have, like, they're like, I don't have time because I have, my Barley softball team and I have these different things that I enjoy and that are fun, but ultimately aren't helping them follow Jesus. I have these connections that I have through work, these friendships, through school or whatever, and get together with people. And some of them might even be other Christ followers. Yep. Some of them might even be connections from Woodlands. It's just none of them help them faithfully follow Jesus.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we help them take that step to leverage that a little bit more?
And I think we ought to recognize a real tension that's way out. Not just a church tension, it's a tension for everyone, is time. We do seem to live in a time and a culture where it is so easy to have 0 white space on your calendar, and with kids, this, that, and the other, and sports. And I don't know how this happened in our society, but it really is. Like when kids are like, one of my kids this summer, like, I just need a little bit of space in my schedule. Like that's my children. When I was 13 years old, I was thinking, I don't know what I was thinking about. I was not thinking about my schedule or just needing to create some white space on my calendar. Like it's not. There's something that's new. That's a tension that I think you feel generally, or the temptation to fill up all your time. And I'm not unconvinced that it's not just one of the ways that the enemy is attacking families and church and even individuals' personal time with the Lord is this idol of how we spend our time.
Screwtape talks about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's part of the Screwtape Letters.
Screwtape Letters is a book by C.S. Lewis, for those who might be listening.
Not just a random record of demonic conversations.
Right.
It's Lewis. It's Lewis. So it's C.S. Lewis.
Going back to some of the points, though, the stat about getting that invitation, and that's why they were actually there on Sunday. I also was kind of thinking about that in terms of we're not a fort, but we're a flashlight. That is people using their flashlight and going outside and looking and inviting and saying, hey, come be a part of a community and come, let me introduce you to my Savior. That's an example of how people are being flashlights into the world.
It's going to be an interesting tension because next week when we talk about stepping into growth, we're going to talk about the fact that because it is such a broad representation of people on a Sunday morning, that caveats the depth that we can go to on a Sunday morning because it's a broad congregation. It doesn't caveat the depth that we can offer in terms of classes and things like that. There's lots of growth opportunities. It's just you have to look beyond Sunday morning.
Sure.
And so it's interesting how these things continue to play together, that as people are more gracious, as the church grows. I mean, it's one of the questions people have said, like, why is Woodland so big? I'm like, well, what would we do? Tell people they can't show up? Like, it's big because people come.
Right.
And that's awesome. And praise Jesus for that.
Yeah.
It just creates tensions in other areas, which is interesting.
And I think the tension is that don't just come sit and soak, but come really dig deep if you want to dig deep in your relationship with Jesus Christ, if you want to grow in your understanding of God's word and how to practice it in your daily life, there are an abundance of opportunities to do that. And so, I would say it's a valid critique if we are just trying to create a big gathering on Sunday mornings. Even when I look at sermons on Sunday mornings, and I've shared this before, to me, it's practice on how we ought to gather with one another. It's practice on how we study God's word together, how we worship with one another in truth. I mean, it is. It's all when we gather together. We are a team practicing to go out and do what we've been called to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate asking this question.
All right.
Because I hate the whole concept, but I also love it so much. When are we going to bring back the community time and service?
The community time and service.
Greet your neighbor time.
Oh, the greet your neighbor time. Like, hey, everybody
Yeah,
stand up and say hi to someone.
Yeah, so.
Is
You
that
like this question?
Is that what
You want
community is? Is that what you're going for?
No, it's not. But it's like as we're talking, that time can be so awkward.
Oh, it's like practice. Is that what you're going
Yeah,
for? Okay.
that's like
Sure.
how does that not like? It feels like it's so.
Is there not built-in time before and after service to do that very thing? Like we have a foyer designed to gather people.
If my wife hears this,
I know,
and she won't because she doesn't listen to my podcast. If she did, she would be like, Dave, don't
She doesn't want that happening.
No,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think there's either people that love it or hate it, but there's not a lot of information.
People aren't really generally neutral on that question.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of that? What's the purpose of It's passing the peace, right?
Well, that in a liturgical,
Sure.
sense that there's more of that. Yeah, there's a sacramental component to that. That's not what we're doing.
No.
So why would
But
we
I
do
think
it?
that there's a practice piece
Sure.
of like, hey, this is your church. We're not just going to. We're not going to let you get away with just showing up and just being present and not doing anything.
Yeah.
But maybe we should. Maybe we do. We do.
I mean, if you're watching, maybe email to Dave or myself why we should or should not do it.
Yeah.
And let's see what kind of answers we get.
I would love some of that, just feedback. So, but there is.
I'm playing through scenarios in my head of like we put at the beginning of service, and all of a sudden you have half the congregation showing up 5 minutes late, or you put at the end of service and you have half the congregation leaving 5 minutes early.
Yeah.
You put it in the middle. What happens?
Yeah.
So it's funny to me about this. I'm wondering if this is a little bit geographic. Down south, where most of my experience was until I moved up north, it was not even a question mark. You always did this because this is what you do. This is, hello, how you doing? It's just
a culture.
It's what we do.
Yeah.
And you might every once in a while hear a gripe about it, but they weren't from around them parts. And it was normal. Normal to greet and say hello and whatever, and kind of didn't really matter the size. In fact, the larger you were, the more you wanted to do it. And that was normal. Stand up and greet the people around you. That was kind of the phrase in my head growing up of after. It was always after. There's even a time in the service. It was after the songs, before the message, and then the preacher would get up and say, "Well, we're just glad you're all here. Welcome you," and then they would start into the service.
That's a pretty natural transition too.
Yeah, you like that. So
yeah. So
anyway,
I did not suggest that.
To respond to that question, the practice thing.
We'll let your wife know this came from your suggestion on a podcast.
It feels like it's coming out of the practice piece, though, more and more, which it does allow the church to be community. But to your point, Whitney, there's time before and after and all throughout, but it's not necessarily intentionally used that way. But anyway, we'll continue.
So I guess something. One of the people that kind of came up to me after the service and said, "Hey, you could have gone more with this particular illustration." Was with the "we're not a fort, but we're a flashlight" distinction. And this particular person was a history nerd along with me, and he actually grew up going to that exact fort.
That's awesome.
And knew it. And I was like, "There's another fort down the river called Fort da da da," and he used to play there as a kid. Anyway, hilarious, really fun conversation. But he said, one of the unique things about a fort is the fort is you defend and you can keep everything out, but you can't affect anything that's happening outside of your walls. If the town or the village is burning down, you're inside your fort.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting point because sometimes whenever churches do turn inward, do we lose the ability to affect those who are hurting outside of our walls, or because we have now turned inward? And that's a critique of the church, I think, in many years, but even a fear that sometimes I have is that we would ever, not that Woodlands is heading that direction at all, but that we would always want to make sure that that matters, that outside our walls matters, because the reality is, I'm going to be with Jesus one day, and I want those people with me. I want them to know Christ and have an opportunity to receive Christ as Lord and Savior. And outside the walls is the mission field. That's why I wear a flashlight. But I thought it was a really interesting distinction of what happens. So I guess, like, how do y'all feel about the dangers of even if turning inwards?
Yeah, I think the other thing that happens often, like you lose your ability because turning inwards in a church context, I think often includes a higher critique of what's happening outside.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a pattern you see is that there's a lot more finger pointing of what's going on in culture in a negative way. And then that just continues to create this insular community that doesn't want to go out into the world because they view the world as enemies.
And I'm just thinking of whatever disease you have now closed in is going to like circulate, right? Like we just talked about being sick. Your son's sick. Like whatever sickness you have inside of those walls. Like think back to siege time. What happens is people die. Like it's just a disease. Like disease happens inside those walls when it's unhealthy both ways.
Right.
Like, you're pointing out there, but there's also disease happening inside typically. Ugh.
Yeah. I think it just very quickly becomes a poisoned place.
Yeah.
And feels that way.
Yeah.
So, and it's certainly not a place that is welcoming or inviting. I mean, that's the opposite of what a fort is in terms of that. It's not open or inviting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you get any pushback on any of those?
No, not one. I was kind of, because one of the...
Not yet.
Not yet. It's Monday.
They're still writing the emails.
If you're listening, you feel free to come on and send me an email.
Those go to John at Woodland Church, not podcast.
I will give my own critiques because I feel like the church is even so much more than those 6 things. And you only have so much time to kind of communicate that. And the church is so beautiful and dynamic. It's I could also say it's not a portrait; it's a mosaic. The church is a beautiful mosaic of lots of pictures, of lots of different connections that God has created and put together. And there's so many. Like my critique would be that it's not full orbed. There's so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
Because the church is just such a beautiful thing to me. I have long loved just the church. It's a beautiful thing.
I think one of the areas, and we're just about out of time here, one of the areas that I've just so appreciated processing, and we will continue processing, and we've processed at different stages over the last year, I think even from a Sunday morning in Acts and stuff, but when we used, and you said it so well, that the church is not a democracy, it's a monarchy, that Christ is the head of the church, the Lord of the church. I think asking the question, okay, well, what does that mean though? Like, how does that affect our decisions? Because, pen to paper, Jesus is not laying out the next year preaching schedule. You are, John, and Jesus is not leading young adult ministry in terms of the scheduling and things like that. That's Whitney, you and your team. And so the question is, how does that practically work? What does it mean that Jesus is Lord of the church? And what does it mean that we're a monarchy? And so I think that's just such a fun question to wrestle with and to ponder on.
And if you're meeting with your small group, it's question number 5.
Nice.
There you go.
Discussion questions. So that'd be fun to hear from if you're in a small group and you're to this point. I recognize a lot of small groups aren't going to be discussing questions at this point. They're probably just going to be getting together just to restart rhythms. But I'd love to hear your answers to 5.
Go ahead, John.
I was thinking through that too because I preached it, and and one of the things that might be immediately applicable is our faith is in the actual King of Woodlands. The Lord of Woodlands is Christ, and so He will never fail us, let us down. But there's a reality that somewhere down the road, like our leadership, we make mistakes. We're human, and we try to be as good as we can, but it's just impossible. If I haven't already, I'm going to say something from the podium that's going to be like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or I worded that wrong or what have you. And I'm going to let some people down. And if we don't understand that Jesus is the head of the church, we can look at sometimes our Christian leaders and hold them to a position that's actually Christ's position and not
That's a good word.
the reality of what Christian leadership is. Christian leadership is stewardship of what is already Christ's. And we are stewarding them as best we can. And we sometimes mess up. I mean, even in your own home finances, sometimes you're like, oh man, we just wasted $100 on. You're like, well, we were bad stewards. Well, you choose and you make a different decision. But that's what Christian leadership is. It's stewardship of what's already Christ. But if we look at our Christian leaders as if they are the head of the church, as Christ is the head of the church, I think we get it backwards. And so when they do inevitably falter or make a mistake, or even and sadly when we've seen some Christian leaders epically fail in moral failure, you can put them in the wrong place in it, and you'd say like, but the king is still the king in real Christian leadership.
As you were talking, I was thinking church hurt, and so often then that gets associated with Jesus hurt, and it shouldn't be. It's church, it's people hurt.
That's right.
And it just continues to blow me away that God chooses to work through people, because there seems like there's more efficient ways to do it.
I don't think efficiency was ever his deal.
Nope.
Effectiveness is, but efficiency was like, you don't put a baby on earth and wait 30 years.
Nope.
If you're looking for efficiency.
The whole even process of communicating truth through Scripture is not the most efficient. So good. Hey, one theme that I've heard through this, and it will track over the next 5 weeks of podcasts, but also beyond that, season 4. Season 4 is about us. Not just us talking, but us, you listeners and viewers, talking to us too, giving us feedback and chiming in. We would love to be processing more of what you send, whether that's questions or comments or thoughts or, hey, this could have been different or better, or send me tidbits and I'll wrap them up into
Dave's tidbit.
Dave's tidbit.
So, hey, you wait until next week. Dave's tidbit next week is just mind blowing.
You have them already. You're stacked up.
I've got next week's.
Excellent.
So, yep.
Stacked up with one.
All I need to do is ask my son for some tidbits. He's got tidbits all
That's
over
probably
us.
true.
So, yep. So anyway, we're going to wrap up though.
But how would somebody ask those questions, Dave?
Podcasts at woodlandchurch.org.
Are we doing text messages too?
Yeah, you're welcome to
Questions?
text it in. Yep. So
Just text the whole question to our number?
yeah, yep. You can text. It's a two-way thing. So if you text in, hey, I've got a question for the podcast.
Okay.
That'll come right to my phone. I get notifications for every text message that comes in to that number.
Exciting.
So,
888-225-7675.
There you go. That's it. So, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. And just a reminder that we do have show notes and includes books that we've referenced. This week, it was only the Screwtape letters, but we'll often reference other books or media and things like that. So, so this has been Cabin Conversations. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.